Donald Trump challenges his base's immigration restrictionists, exposing a bit of a rift even in his own administration, especially over the issue of skilled foreign workers. Who has the better of this debate?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome to Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal. I'm Kim Strassel, and joining me today to talk about the immigration wars are my colleagues Mene Ukwe-Barua and Alicia Finley. Welcome to you both. The president appeared Tuesday night on Fox News' Laura Ingraham show, where the topic became the number of visas the U.S. issues for skilled workers, what we call H-1B visas. And the host and the president weren't necessarily on the same page. Let's listen to that exchange.
If you want to raise wages for American workers, you can't flood the country with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of foreign workers.
You also do have to bring in talent.
We have plenty of talented people here.
No, you don't.
We don't have talented people here?
No, you don't have certain talents, and people have to learn. You can't take people off an unemployment line and say, I'm going to put you into a factory where we're going to make missiles.
So I find this latest Donald Trump fascinating, and here's why. Because in September, the White House issued an executive order arguing that tech firms and other parts of industry were manipulating the H-1B program and that too many skilled foreign workers were indeed coming in, making it harder for Americans to find jobs. And in the process of that, they slapped a new $100,000 fee per H-1B1 petition. So before we even talk about the debate we just saw there, Mene, I'm still trying to figure out the debate within Donald Trump. In the past too, he's also said he was in favor of H-1B visas, that he's used them in the past. Then we have this order, and now he comes back out again and seems to defend it. He seems to have really gone back and forth. What do you think this is? Is this the real Donald Trump? Is this how he really feels? Is he walking back that view from September? Where does this fit in?
Well, to the examples you gave, I think we can add a few others. For example, his position on workplace raids. He comes out and says, we're not going to do these types of raids. I'm hearing from the farmers and from, the meat packers that they're totally getting killed. And then a couple of weeks later, his administration says the workplace raids are back. Or deportation. He says, we're going to just focus on the criminal migrants. We don't want a big splashy example of a mother with children being deported. And then all of a sudden, the administration continues doing exactly that type of raid. And so there's clearly a war within the Trump administration over how to approach the immigration issue. Are they going to do the kind of border enforcement first and focus on allowing legal immigration, or are they going to really crack down and try to maximize their anti-immigrant direction? And I think it's clear if you actually follow what Trump himself says, that he tends to be in favor of the more practical approach. He tends to be in favor of let's make sure that the border is secure without disrupting growth and business. But there are very influential people inside his administration, Stephen Miller, one of them, and JD Vance as well, as we'll discuss, who definitely want to go a little bit further and think that the base wants the Trump administration to really be cracking down on immigrants across the board. And so I think it's fascinating that people are still able to put these policies in front of Trump that go way further than he himself might want to go if he were able to direct every single aspect of his own administration's immigration agenda. And it's possible that maybe after you have so many of these clashes, Trump will finally decide, hey, I'm going to make sure that we're going to implement the immigration agenda that I actually want and think is good for the country.
Yeah, I like how you put that. I do think this is pragmatism butting up against ideological, political and policy views. And we've seen this in a number of different areas with Donald Trump, where he touches on an issue that the base wants to hear, like immigration. And that's definitely one, given the excesses of the Biden administration, folks wanted to see things change. But then again, Donald Trump's a businessman. So he's got his limits on how far that should go, but then he inspires all these people in his base to be really, really hardcore on it. And then, how does he handle that fallout? Alicia, the president went on in that Ingraham interview to give a specific example. He actually criticized his own administration's raid on a Hyundai Energy Solution battery plant in Georgia, where hundreds of South Korean nationals were detained. And I quote him here. He said to Ingraham, they have like 500 or 600 people, early stages to make batteries and to teach people how to do it. But then immigration agents, quote, wanted them to get out of the country. You're going to need them. And it strikes me, he's simply right there. Our editorial this week talks some about just how many of our Fortune 500 companies were started by immigrants or their kids, how many people they employ, huge numbers of startups founded by international students. What's the actual evidence out there on the ground about the importance of immigrants to our sort of corporate success and wealth creation?
Well, you just listed some of the evidence right there. There's also a University of California Davis study done last year that found that increases in immigration, particularly high-skilled immigration, actually have beneficial effects on wages and employment among lower-skilled workers. And the reason why that is because the R&D, the innovation produces jobs. For instance, in manufacturing or production, and these are actually complementary. They're not competing for the same jobs. I'd also note that many members of Congress, I saw an estimate about a quarter of members of Congress are actually immigrants or children of immigrants, and that would include, by the way, Bernie Moreno, a Colombian immigrant who's just elected the senator of Ohio, Ted Cruz, and many others. And they make many contributions both in the science realm, and many of the Nobel Prize winners in sciences from the U.S. have been immigrants. And by the way, JD Vance's in-laws, his wife's parents, are both scientists, and they are immigrants. So many people in the U.S. Right now actually are immigrants or children of immigrants. And there's a growing workforce contributes to economic growth. Economic growth, GDP growth, is really a function of productivity gains and the labor force. And immigrants contribute to both in terms of their innovations and enhancing productivity. If you look at a lot of the companies, tech companies, NVIDIA, Google, and others were founded in part by immigrants. And those are producing all kinds of innovations that are enhancing living standards and work productivity. And are why the U.S. actually continues to lead the world in innovation. I mean, we're facing more competition from China, but one of our big comparative advantages, so to speak, is our immigration. So that people actually want to come here from all around the world, start companies, and you don't get that in China.
And the thing that strikes me about that too is it's not just that they've created companies that are innovating and increasing our productivity. They're creating a great number of jobs. I mean, if you look at some of those companies that you just mentioned there, and you think about the handful in the end of immigrants who came in and were actually the kind of founders of those companies, and then the tens of thousands of new jobs that have flowed from that. I think that that's a really important aspect of this too. Monet, one thing that was interesting about this Trump interview and this rift, as it were, with Laura Ingraham, she very clearly disagreed with him. Whatever his actual view on this, she's not alone. This did not go down well with a number of his MAGA restrictionists. I can quote some influencers who were out there. Kevin Sorbo, the actor, a Trump supporter, said, quote, "What an atrocious thing to say. This will cost Republicans the midterms." Steven Crowder, another popular right-wing podcaster, called Trump's comments as bad as it gets. And he added, "I was hoping he learned from Elon's blunder on this one, but it's not looking like it." But interestingly as well, sort of at odds with a message coming from JD Vance, his own vice president. Vance was at Turning Point USA event last month. He was asked about immigration. Let's hear what he had to say about that.
Now, look, legal immigration is complicated because we let in about 1 million legal immigrants into the United States of America every single year. And I think the evidence is pretty clear that a lot of those immigrants are actually undercutting the wages of American workers. It's one of the reasons why the President of the United States, and a lot of us in the administration have encouraged H-1B reform, because if you look at the H-1B visa, what it's supposed to be is that you have a super genius who's studying at an American university, who's working at a great company. You want that super genius to stay in the United States of America and not go somewhere else. What it's actually used to do is hire an accountant at a 50% discount to an American citizen. I don't think that we should be hiring accountants from foreign countries when we've got accountants right here in the United States that would love to work for a good wage.
So, Monet, Alicia just talked a little bit about that, UC Davis study about wages, et cetera. But a fundamental aspect of Vance's argument there, the suggestion he is making is that, and this is very common, you hear it among those who want less immigration, fewer of these H-1B visas, is that you are taking jobs that would otherwise be filled by Americans. What's the actual evidence out there in terms of those kind of statistics?
Well, I think it's actually an easy question to answer in a certain regard, because in a lot of these industries where immigrants are coming to work, like agricultural jobs, also, certain types of light manufacturing jobs. And then if you go up the income scale and look at IT and certain types of tech jobs, these are industries that have massive numbers of job openings compared with the rest of the economy at large. JD Vance is right in a narrow sense that there are also American people in some of those fields, but not enough to fill the openings that these companies are creating. And frankly, these companies have huge incentives to actually hire domestically. H-1B visas, for example, are very expensive, and it's very time intensive to go through the application process, to sponsor somebody who's coming over. If they have a ready and available pool of people to fill those jobs, it's definitely much more convenient for them to do that. So the fact that they continue to look overseas and go through the difficult process of importing workers shows that there just aren't enough Americans to fill these positions. But I think it's also fascinating to look at the politics. Some of those quotes you mentioned at the beginning from Kevin Sorbo, et cetera, talking about how this is going to lose Republicans the midterms. They're exactly wrong. I think that that's actually even a worse argument than the idea that legal immigration is bad in economic terms. Poll after poll shows that Americans broadly support legal immigration. They want the border to be secure, and they want people to, show that they're going by the book and the way that they come to the United States. But large majorities, even of Republican voters, support legal immigration. Trump himself, when he began his 2015 campaign for president, of course, said we're going to build the wall, but it's going to have a big, beautiful door for legal immigrants to come through. That's always been his position. And so I think that both on the politics and on the economic part of the policy, they both militate in the direction of the more pragmatic approach that President Trump seems to want to take.
This is a very good point. We're not talking here about all the people who came in illegally. We're actually talking here, everyone's having a debate about H-1B visas. These are legal papers you get to come in and work. And these folks are saying we don't even want them in here. Also, I would note that it isn't just in terms of the U.S. economy. It isn't just a question of skilled workers either. There's reports out that show that about a half of all small businesses report few or no qualified applicants for job offerings they put forward. So this Vance argument that's like, this is how they manipulate the system and they bring people in like accountants, and we're not really talking about high skilled workers. Even in other industries where you're going down the skills ladder, we also don't have enough folks to actually fill some of these positions. I want to go back to something you mentioned, Alicia, because Vance has also been making a cultural argument here. At the Turning Point event, he did at one point concede that immigrants do, in fact, some immigrants enrich the United States. But he went on to say that you nonetheless have to massively reduce the overall numbers anyway, because, and I quote him here, "We have got to become a common community again. And you can't do that when you have such high numbers of immigration. We have got to get our overall numbers way, way down." And this, it resonates with some people, especially people, I think, who look out there and there's a certain fear and worry in the United States. In some quarters, they look, for instance, at what's happened in some of the European countries where you've had huge numbers of asylum seekers and immigration numbers, and it has resulted in some ethnic ghettoization, cities and entire areas divided up kind of more in clannish country of origin geographies. But, Alicia, it just doesn't strike me that that is the experience of the United States.
No, it isn't. And it hasn't been throughout history. I mean, you can look back. We've always had big waves of immigrants going back to the 19th century with the Irish. Then you had the Italians in the early 20th century. And then, Chinese waves. And then later in the early 20th century, Vietnamese, Koreans, and others, emigres during the Cold War, and refugees. Cubans, by the way, are a large share of Florida's population. And if you go to ask Ron DeSantis, how much are they contributing to their communities? Are they in ethnic ghettos? I think you'd hear that he'd swat down Vance's argument pretty fast. American immigrants, they tend to assimilate. I mean, you could argue for better or worse pretty quickly. And when I say for worse, it's because, well, their kids, once they get here, their kids, they tend to be more secular. They tend to be less religious. You can see that in the data. The parents tend to go to church much more often than kids do. But the kids are become much more like their American counterparts. They're also much more liberal. They go to college. You can say that they get indoctrinated, but they also become educated. Many of them become educated. And so when you look at another example is just the interracial marriage rates. 25% of Hispanics marry other people from a different race. It's actually a little higher among Asians. So this doesn't look like anything like what Europe is experiencing. I recall someone just once saying that Europe wishes it had America's immigration problems. The people who come here generally do come here to work. They, start small businesses, dry cleaners, restaurants, that enrich everyone. So I think if JD Vance were to get out a little more and visit around the country, and not just, stick to his right-wing echo chamber, he'd discover this.
Yeah, I want to go back to how this, something you touched on, how this plays in the politics and maybe in next year's election. Trump did exhibit some real pragmatism there, and he has done that in the past on H-1B visas. But he isn't backing down on a lot of his other deportation strategy. And we should be kind of clear why not. Because if you look at one of the Real Clear Politics average of his approval rating on different issues, immigration is one of his better issues. Still, I think a lot of Americans are still a little shell-shocked by the open border policies that were there during the Biden years, and appreciate someone is trying to do something, although there is also indication that some voters are beginning to think it goes too far. Still, a number of polls show him at 50% or higher on this issue, which somewhat beats the socks off how people think he's handling inflation or the economy or trade. So there's going to be some weight in the White House to keep this going. But what I think you saw there with Trump is that he recognizes that this is, that aspects of this and a kind of very strict immigrationist position is a bit of a threat to the economy. Not just in skilled workers and jobs creation, but, as you mentioned, he's also talked about this with regard to farmers and ag workers. How big of a threat is it if this kind of approach continues of really clamping down to the economy and therefore to GOP political prospects?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest issues in the elections that we had very recently was affordability. In fact, that was the dominant issue. And there are all sorts of problems contributing to prices increasing across the board. Trump's tariffs are a big one. But one of the issues that I think is flying a little bit under the radar is the fact that we have fewer workers coming over and filling some of these jobs, which makes it harder for small businesses in particular to produce the things that they need to at a way that's cost efficient for them. And when they have a hard time filling jobs or they have to pay more for their labor, frankly, that price is going to be passed on to consumers. And so I think this problem is only going to get worse the longer we go. I think Americans are rewarding President President Trump politically for having closed the border and stopped the wave of illegal immigration. But that has to be offset by policies that allow guest workers to come in, that allow people to come in an orderly process and fill some of these jobs. Otherwise, that's going to put a big squeeze on businesses. And Trump is already feeling some of the pain for that politically, and is flailing to try to find what a real practical affordability agenda could be. So I think it's inevitable that they're going to have to think very seriously, even though there are so many parts of their base that are opposed to even these kinds of guest worker or temporary worker programs, about how they can make that happen, because the economy really, really requires it.
Yeah. And, Alicia, last question to you, because the interesting question here is, does Trump decide that he's really going to push back on this or not? Right. And we've seen this happening more. People out in his base actually suggesting like, you don't really know what MAGA is, Mr. President, and trying to sort of suggest that they know better than he does. And you're seeing that kind of poking at him from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and this kind of this base out there now that would like to see the party go a little bit more in the direction that sometimes JD Vance is talking about. He is the president. And we've seen a few moments where he's kind of poked back and he's like, I kind of invented this term. I know what I'm talking about. You don't here. So is he going to, where do you think this heads in terms of that divide in the White House?
Well, I think you make a lot of good points. When Trump first ran for president, or started running about 10 years ago, the first time, right? He, campaigned on this big border wall, but he also talked about the need for, a big, beautiful, a door in that wall to allow people in legally. And the president very much has supported, some kind of compromise for dreamers. And these were young adults, some not so young, some now are in their early 40s, who were brought to the country illegally as kids, and forge a compromise with, Democrats. And they sought to do that during his first term. That would have, provided more money for border security in return for legal status for dreamers, and some tweaks to the immigration system to allow more people to come in legally. The problem then was that you had Steve Bannon and the two Steves, Steve Bannon and Steve Miller, who scuttled that compromise and aren't interested because they have an ideological hostility to immigration. They only want any legal immigration. And that is right now the schism in the Republican Party. Is there's some like Trump who actually really just, I think in his heart, only really opposes illegal immigration. I mean, he's a businessman. He employed many immigrants, foreign workers on H-1B visas for short-term, guest workers. He understands the businesses rely on them. I mean, you saw that you heard that in his remarks about the Georgia raid. And he understands that businesses need people to come to the country to train people to work. But then there are people who are a little less pragmatic, who really don't understand this and understand the needs of businesses. And to be honest, I have a little bit of a more restrictionist and maybe a nativist disposition, that they worry about the American culture, and somehow that you heard it in JD Vance's remarks, that somehow they're gonna mar our common, quote unquote, common community, whatever that means. And so you see a fight within the administration between these two wings, and which one wins out. Well, I think right now it's the Miller and Bannon wing, because the other wing isn't fighting back.
Well, I want to throw in one last thing here as an end, just to not forget the role, unfortunately, Democrats have played in really poisoning the well for some sort of broader immigration debate and discussion. Joe Biden's initial bill on this was absolutely insane, really upset a lot of Republicans in Congress, and obviously the border morass afterward did not help. But Alicia Monet, I want to thank you for your time today. We want to thank our listeners, and you can send your own thoughts to us on this debate at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit the subscribe button, and we'll be back with you on Monday.